Welcome back to The Source. I'm John Robson, in for Ezra Levant. You know, a lot of people look at the state of the world and think the end is coming, and most of them are kind of upset about that. But there's a smaller group who are so prepared that I think they may be disappointed if it's not. We're joined now by Sun News Network's Chris Sims to talk to us about the growing survivalist movement, starting with growing your own food.
Absolutely, Dr. Robson. Admittedly, I'm interested in it myself. I've always read this kind of literature and watched these kind of movies, but there is a growing movement for growing your own food, and there's actually people who have got basically a resurgence of victory gardens, especially in the United States. There's a very popular website and blog called Red, White and Grew, and it's picking up off of the victory garden idea that, of course, was started during the First World War. And the idea is for food security. You know, what happens if the supply lines go down? What are you going to eat? And that's really what they're focusing on this time around, because right now, basically supermarkets and grocery stores no longer store or stockpile a lot of food. All of our food is out there on an interconnected web of highways in refrigerated trucks. And the worry always is, what happens if they stop rolling? For whatever reason, a flood, a terrorist attack, a major earthquake, oil stoppage, something like that. So that's where I really started thinking about it and reading about it. So that's one of the first parts of my series. But then as you go deeper and deeper, there are folks who are taking this very seriously, to the point of moving their families out of major cities. They're developing networks of friends who have employable skills if the economy really were to grind to a halt. And they're stockpiling things like food and water.
Yeah, and this is, part of it is where paranoia meets environmentalism. Obviously, it's good for us if we have a little bit less transportation, a little more home growing. But one of the things that's always bothered me about this, I've occasionally looked at the cottage and thought, how long could I actually feed myself on this land, even if I knew what I was doing? I mean, a victory garden is going to keep you alive for what, a week if it's the right season?
That's a good point. It depends on how much you grow, really, and how much and which way you preserve. If you have it growing all season, theoretically, if you had, say, half an acre, you might be able to keep your family going for the year if you preserve all of it really well. Most of us aren't that good of gardeners, but there's also a huge, and I mean huge, booming business in food storage when it comes to, buy your year-long supply of food rations that'll keep you going for an entire year, including vitamins and minerals, that sort of thing. These things aren't just available on, kind of out there survivalist websites. You can go to Costco and buy it. And, you don't need to be a survivalist, the comet's going to hit the earth or Armageddon type survivalist to really be prepared. If you go to any run-of-the-mill government emergency preparedness website, they recommend to have food and water for at least 3 days. Water for sure. They recommend 3 weeks of food. Many people don't have 3 weeks of food.
Well, I lived through the Ottawa ice storm, and though, of course, I would have frozen the water. But this is clearly one of the first things. What do you want to do in a crisis? Don't be part of the problem. Have enough clean water to drink for you and your family, if you have a family. And ideally, also have enough food so that even if you can't help other people, you at least don't become part of the burden. You can sit tight. But some people think if you're just growing your own food and filling the basement with water and stuff and medical supplies, you're a total wimp. They want you to bury a school bus, or at least, or perhaps several.
Absolutely. I actually spoke with a man who claims to have the largest privately built bunker in North America. And it's right north of Toronto, and it's 42 school buses that he buried underground under about 6 or 8 feet or something, and then used that as a form and poured concrete around it. So it's all these individual segmented areas to live in. This guy is actually worried about nuclear war, and he says that nuclear war is not a thing of the past. Now that we're getting, quasi-states and non-states possibly acquiring nuclear weapons, he says it's a much more real threat than before. This guy worked in the American Air Force and apparently did service as a radioactivity monitor. He said back in the 50s and 60s, it was just like getting your CPR ticket, and they would give you a Geiger counter, and you did your part for the country and monitored. So he kind of internalized all of that and has built himself a massive bunker. And he has all sorts of people working on it on the weekends. It's pretty much complete. They're basically painting and decorating at this point.
As far as you can tell, is there any particular kind of person who gets drawn into this, or is it a really broad cross-section of people who've just got the jitters to the point that they're starting to stockpile?
That's a good question. There's always the ones that people like to, smirk at, the people who are worried about the Mayan 2012 calendar stopping or, that sort of thing, another Chicxulub hitting the earth. But generally, when I'm speaking to true survivalists who have got plans, they've got supplies, they're usually what I would describe as libertarian individuals They usually are hyper aware of global politics and economic politics, I'll point out as well. They're worried about a fiat currency typically, and they usually stockpile weapons as well as their food. So if I could say they're on any one end of the spectrum, they're usually kind of libertarian right.
Okay, we're almost out of time, and I'm not going to go with the bazookas, but leaving aside burying the school buses, do you have a short list of things that every sensible person should have, at least for the short run, for an emergency? And if so, what are the items they might not think of that they really should?
That's a good point as well. Generally, I would actually, and I rarely do, recommend to go to the Government of Canada website. They've got an excellent list of things for what to do in an emergency when disaster strikes, whether you've got an earthquake or a tornado, that sort of thing. But as far as things that you can carry in your purse, there's just certain things that are handy to have on hand. For example, I've got this metal flashlight. It's LED. And it's just nice to have. What happens if all of the power in your building goes out and the emergency lights don't go on? Are you going to grope your way down a dark staircase for 30 floors? You'd be the real hero if you had a flashlight to help people out. Also, it seems silly, but a basic pocket knife just to cut through something. If you're hung up on something, if you can't get something open, it's good to have a tool. Don't pack it on the way to the airport, though, for sure. Also, cell phone systems often go down, and one of the first ones that they put back up are pay phones. But most people don't carry a roll of quarters. It's a handy thing to have in your purse or your messenger bag, because if you've had a problem, say a natural disaster in your area, or for some reason the cells are down and you need to call out to a third-party family member to say you're okay, you're going to need a lot of these, especially if it's long distance.
Okay, well, there you go. If the world ends, Kris Sims will be there to report on it. Thanks for sharing that with us. When we